Hi everyone! Today we're gonna really get into the meat of things because I'll be going over how I designed and modeled the first creature for my paleontology game, Marsozoic. This is the creature that will be used to prototype the deduction mechanics of the game, so it needs to have some intriguing features that players will be able to deduce from its fossils. In fact, that's really the first part of the brief. For any creature that I'll be designing for Marsozoic, it needs to make biological sense so that players will actually be able to deduce reasonably how the creature lived, how it perceived the environment, how it moved, how it fed, all of those kinds of things. At the same time, we are on Mars in the game, so these are alien creatures I'll be designing, and so they need to look the part, because it would be a little boring if the Martian ecosystem mostly looked like Earth's ecosystem. So our creatures need to make sense ecologically, but they should also be full of surprises, they should feel strange and interesting and just alien. So thankfully for this aspect, I have a great inspiration in the works of Wayne Barlow, especially his famous book Expedition. In this book, he takes us along on a great expedition to the fictional planet Darwin 4, where he describes the ecosystem in full detail. The book contains all these amazing, uncanny alien creatures, along with full descriptions of how they live. It's a really classic work of speculative evolution, and it's an incredible inspiration for Marsozoic, since I'll also be attempting to create a sensical alien ecosystem. So I'll definitely be taking some cues from Barlow, and I'd love for the Marsozoic creatures to kind of have a similar vibe. And then we have a third point to the brief. Because I'm making a paleontology game, not only do I need to design the creature itself, I also need to design the creature's skeleton. That's actually kind of even more important than the live creature, because the skeleton is gonna be what players interact with, and you need to be able to get some idea of the living creature just from the skeleton. So the skeleton needs to look cool, distinct, and most importantly to contain all the necessary clues. So of course it's gonna have an impact on the overall creature design. Okay, so we have our constraints, we're almost ready to start. Last quick thing before we dive in. Since the game will specifically be about reconstituting these creatures, the players will pretty much be going through the design process backwards when playing the game. And so showing a creature's design process is technically spoilers for the game. So going forward, I'll probably avoid showing too much creature design, but this one is really a first prototype creature. It might not even end up in the final game, or at least not in this form. So for this one, I'll just go through the entire process, really show how I went about it. Let's get started. So how does one actually design a proper, living, ecologically sensical creature? When I want to learn about a topic in depth, I always look for a book, and I found this amazing book, Fundamentals of Creature Design. It contains pretty much everything I wanted. It has a detailed process with a bunch of anatomy and design advice, and step-by-step design examples from amazing creature artists. So I really recommend this book if you're interested in the topic. The book's process starts out by entirely defining the ecological niche for your creature, laying out what features you want it to have, how it interacts with its environment, pretty much all the things that players will need to figure out in Marsozoic, so that's a perfect starting point for us. And so I did exactly that. Here it is, the ecological design web of our first prototype creature. So I started with what environment and what time in Mars's geological history I wanted this creature to live in. Mars had 4 big geological eras that I'll be using as a basis in reality. I decided to start with a Noachian creature. The Noachian was a period 4 billion years ago when there was a ton of liquid water on the surface of Mars, and it's even possible that the entire northern hemisphere was covered in this giant ocean. And so we're going to start with that. A Noachian aquatic creature that travels huge stretches of this giant ocean. And while reading about the Noachian, I also learned that there would have been constant storms and strong winds on the surface of that ocean, with nothing to deflect them at all. So along with the Martian gravity being only 1/3 of that of Earth, that gave me the idea of a large creature that would use those winds to get around, like catching them in a big sail to glide along the ocean surface, almost like a sailboat. So then the first step was to do some quick research. Are there any creatures on Earth that do something similar? And amazingly, there is. There's this one species of jellyfish, the Velella. They have this little sail on their back, and they float at the surface of the sea, and they just let themselves be blown about by the wind. So on Mars, we can for sure imagine a kind of larger organism doing something similar, while having actual control of the sail to actually navigate. Maybe something structured a bit like an actual sailfish. So next up was defining how this creature would feed, and so I thought, okay, this creature is getting pushed by strong winds. What if it could actively filter through the water at the same time, kind of like a whale when it's feeding by filtering water through its baleen? And baleen can even like fossilize, so that makes for a really cool clue. And then since my mind was already, kind of thinking sailboat, I thought, well, What if it filter feeds by kind of trolling the ocean? So by kind of spreading these baleen tendrils behind it to catch small animals that it sails. And that's where those peacock gifs come in. That was me picturing it kind of spreading its web of tendrils behind it in this wide kind of unfolding tail. Then I went further down the rabbit hole in that direction, looking at birds with similar long trailing tails that they can then fold out behind them like that. So then I thought, all right, if that's how it catches its food, how does it actually consume it? Does a tail kind of curl up towards some kind of mouse? Instead, I thought it'd be cooler and less cumbersome if the tendrils themselves could kind of liquefy and digest the prey, so similar to some carnivorous plants. And this is me researching exactly how that works in carnivorous plants. And as a clue for that, we could somehow make it clear that the tendrils are hollow with some like channels inside them to bring the digested liquefied food into the organism. So the tendrils could look something really similar like that, kind of glue the prey as it filters through the water. So I was pretty happy with that basic concept, and then there were a few more questions to answer, mainly how it perceives its environment. So we discussed earlier how the creature needs to look alien, and I thought that something that can help with that would be the absence of eyes, because as humans we tend to really look into a being's eyes to connect with it, and creatures without eyes tend to look quite uncanny. So I figured I might like to create an ecosystem where no creature has eyes. Incidentally, that's also exactly what Barlow does in Expedition. No creature depicted there has eyes, and that helps them look so alien. However, if we do go down that road, it also means giving up on any kind of visual displaying in the creature's design. Stuff like bright colors to attract a mate and camouflage, those really cool visual aspects of animals. At the same time, these aspects, stuff like color and self-display structures, they tend to fossilize really badly in real life, so it might be a good thing to give up on them entirely in a paleontology game. Or maybe some creatures have eyes, some others don't, we'll see. I'm already overthinking it. But the one we're working on right now will not have eyes, it will use something else to get around. So let's think, what does this creature actually need to be able to perceive in its environment? It's going to navigate at high speeds over long distances, so it needs to effectively perceive obstacles. And then it trolls this web of tendrils behind it for food, so it should be able to actually identify where banks of small creatures are in the water. And as it happens, on Earth there are some large marine creatures that have very similar needs. That's marine cetaceans, and they use echolocation for that purpose. And this is why I went into a deep dive into how echolocation actually works. So cetaceans emit clicks that get amplified by this big waxy organ called the melon. That's typically the big round lump that they have on their heads. So the clicks get amplified, they rebound off obstacles and creatures in the environment, they come back to the cetacean and they get received in the lower jaw typically, or the rostrum, or like this big bony structure that conducts the sound back to the brain where it gets interpreted, and so they get this mental map of their surroundings. So I decided that our creature would echolocate exactly the same way, without any need for eyes at all. So it will need a melon, and some sort of like rostrum or some kind of bony structure that can receive the echoes coming back. That won't be the jaw, since our creature doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't need one, it eats through its tendrils. So it will be a structure really dedicated to echolocation and maybe, for defense or mating fights, maybe it can ram opponents with it. The cool thing about echolocation organs is that they can also be used for social communication. Dolphin and whales don't just use the clicks for echolocation, but also to communicate between themselves. And so if our creature travels in pods, then you can just imagine them kind of gliding information on the surface water, kind of like migrating birds, coordinating through clicks and just fanning out their tendrils to cover this really wide strip of ocean so that no prey can escape. And there we have it. With this kind of step-by-step thinking, pretty quickly I got to this pretty complete creature concept, with a good idea of what it would look like, how it would live, and what kind of clues the skeleton could give. So then came the step I was kind of dreading, which was to make a rough sketch of the creature. I'm not very good at drawing, I'd very much like to improve. I'm actually hoping this project will help me improve the drawing skills a bit. So I was quite stressed about this step because I knew that what I drew would not stand up to what I was picturing in my head. So I was really avoiding actually starting, and I was procrastinating by doing other things. At that point my partner saw that and he helped by reminding me that it didn't need to be perfect, especially at this stage. It just needed to be good enough. These sketches won't be in the game or anything, they don't need to be masterpieces, they just need to bring the creature's characteristics together into a general shape. So I sat down and I struggled through it, and here they are, my not very good, but okay enough sketches. This is a top-down view, and you can see the melon here and this kind of tuning fork shaped rostrum at the front to get the echoes back. and the vertical sail fin here on the back, the long trailing tail that can be unfolded to fan out the sticky tendrils. And then here are some side views with the tail fanned out underwater. And then also those large stabilizing fins on the side. I figured I would need that to stabilize on the surface of the water, especially if it's navigating with the wind. And then it would be able to fully fold them out or kind of tuck them in closer to help maneuver or go faster. I also experimented with the idea of some air sacs under the skin here at the bottom to help it stay afloat since it's always on the surface. So now that I had a broad idea of what I wanted the creature to actually look like, I figured that since I'm more at ease with a mouse than a pencil, I could try making a quick 3D model of the creature, not to put in the game, just as a reference, and as a base to make the skeleton. So it was time to dust off my Blender knowledge. I've used Blender a bit in the past, but it was a long time ago, and so there was quite a bit of struggling at the start. You can see me fight for my life here, trying to remember how to do pretty much anything. A lot of vertices being deleted and recreated one by one to try and model this thing, and I've cut out the worst bits of it. So Blender experts, please avert your eyes. But eventually it started to kind of take shape. And so now that I had the general shape of the creature down, it was time for the pièce de résistance, actually designing the skeleton. So by that point, I had built up a tiny bit of confidence, just enough to really roughly sketch it. So here I toyed a bit with the idea of a double-sided ribcage as a Martian evolutionary trait, but I left it out for now because it was gonna make the modeling much harder and more confusing. And again, this is a prototype, so I'm trying to keep things kind of simple. The double-sided ribcage might be back later, we'll see. And so then I took that rough sketch, I put it in Blender, and I got to work. So here you see some more struggling with Blender, but as I went, it eventually did start to get easier. Challenging myself with something pretty complex like a skeleton actually allowed me to get familiar with some Blender features I really hadn't used before, especially the sculpting tools, that's what you're seeing here. And that eventually started making things a lot more pleasant, even though there's still some geometry issues. As I went, I really thought about which parts of the creature would need the most support, which ones were the most mobile, and so would need solid bones to attach the muscles to. So that top front part that looked like a skull isn't actually the skull, it's the sternum that supports the sail fin. Since the creature can orient its sail to navigate, there needs to be a large bony platform there to support strong muscles that can pull on the sail fin one side or the other. I kind of like that it looks like the skull at first approach because that will allow me to test deductions based on X-ray. If you X-ray the sternum bone, you should see that it has no real cavity for a brain. Instead, the skull is a separate bone at the front there with a rostrum, a round place for the melon, and a brain cavity at the back. I'll need to tweak and improve all this down the line for sure, but for now we're just testing general concepts. An important clue in the game will be muscle scars. In real-life paleontology, they are marks left on the bone where muscles used to attach. In Marsozoic, we're gonna really push the concept and put obvious big muscle scars where important muscles attached. So that should give players hint as to which bones connect with which other one, how limbs moved, and what they were actually used for. So for example, if you find an arm that has long curved claws and muscle scars that show that it had huge muscles attached, you can take a pretty good guess that the arms may have been used for digging. For this creature here, I sculpted on some details to make the bone surface look rugged and damaged where the bones would have attached. So for example here, really big muscle scars around the sail fin to pull on it. But I'm not actually happy with that approach. It's not at all obvious enough, and detail like this requires a huge face count on the mesh. That's not at all what I want. I'd like to keep the meshes quite simple, maybe give them a more blocky kind of low poly style. So after this experiment, I decided that from now on, the muscle scars would be really obviously drawn on, not actually sculpted. So obviously that was a bit of work, but it really helped me get more comfortable with Blender again, and I'm pretty happy with the result. Even though some parts have some glaring geometry issues, that's okay. It will work for prototyping, and I learned for the next skeleton. So all that was left now was to divide the skeleton into nice separate chunks to make fossils that the player will be able to excavate and assemble. And then as a test, I applied a quick cell fracture treatment to explode each fossil into multiple big fragments, and deleted some of those fragments to create the effect of a cracked, broken fossil. For a really quick test, it worked pretty well. I'll need to see if this is something I'd want to pursue for the in-game fossils, or if it risks making things a lot more confusing for the player. But now here's a really cool bonus thing to finish on. As I was finishing up the skeleton, I also hired an artist friend of mine to make a quick illustration of the living creature. So I sent them all the materials you saw in this video. We went back and forth about some specifics, and here it is, their rendition of the living beast. So I'd like illustrations like this to reward the players when they finish putting together a creature skeleton and info sheet. If you like the style of this illustration, the artist is on Instagram at LynTristanArt. They can be commissioned for illustrations, and they also alter Magic the Gathering cards, so be sure to check them out. If you're still watching, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that whole process. I sure did. Designing this creature was a lot of fun. I learned a ton, and it's going to allow us to test the actual deduction mechanics of the game. I'll go into that in the next videos. For now, take care, and I'll see you next time.